Welcome to She Blaze, where we're bringing you cannabis culture from a woman's point of view. And as always, here to elevate the cannabis industry. I'm one of your hosts, Ice Dawson, Cannabis Socialite.
And I am Dasheeda Dawson, the WeedHead.
Hi, sis.
Hey, sis. Hey, sis.
Hey, sis. On today's episode of She Blaze, Weedmaps closes the year going public. Maryland Medical Marijuana Dispensary is sued for sexual harassment. And Canopy Growth makes power moves.
Woo! Well, of course, we got a good one, and I'm sure everybody's like, girl, what is happening with your video? Well, that's my high of the week, I guess, is that I'm struggling with some internet, but it was time to get us going. I'm definitely excited to still be able to bring She Blaze, even though we've actually had a holiday. So I'll just throw it to you, Ice, for you to share your high of the week since we're in the beginnings of that holiday.
Okay, well, Baragani.
Happy Kwanzaa.
Yes, happy Kwanzaa, everybody. And that is my high of the week, is really spending Kwanzaa with my family, whether we're spending it virtually or in person with a very small gathering. It is a tradition that we've done in my family long before I was even born, with my sister Imani back in days, being named Imani. And it was something that, not too many people could do. We couldn't get all of the days on the actual list because we ran out of space, but just so you know, there are 7 days, and it's really important to the African American community, and so I hope people are keeping up the tradition.
Well, I think you listed all of them but Imani being the 7th day, which means faith. And you're right. Mommy was definitely, when I look back, given the year that our sister was born, when you talk about the fact that they come from a family where everybody's name was like, Mabel, George, Yvonne, Darlene, she's like, I'm going to name her Imani. And I think now that we know how popular, this is the most popular Black name in right now, how crazy it is that 40-something years later, that would be the case, and Mommy had the foresight. But I've appreciated being able to celebrate Kwanzaa with my son, and him understanding it for the next generation. I don't really celebrate Christmas any longer. It's been so commercialized to me as a former retail executive. But Umoja is today, and today is all about unity. And I'm appreciative of being able to unify with you to do a She Blaze episode, because, girl, you brought the tea on it.
Yes, I did. And thank you guys for watching. I did bring the tea, and it is piping hot. So let's get into these hot topics. Our first hot topic is about really, Congress. They are still making some very bold moves while the country is in a crazy downward spiral, depending on what news station you watch. They are still passing laws. And so this bill actually passed the House and the Senate. And the reason why it's so important, it basically put a mailing ban on e-cigarettes, which I know everyone's like, okay, so what does e-cigarettes have to do with cannabis? But unfortunately, it does loop cannabis in, because in the language, it has such a broad term basically saying it's banning the device mechanism in which people vape. So not just nicotine, but other chemicals that are vape. And what else is vape? Cannabis. So as CBD comes on live and comes on the market, it is actually hurting it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those type of situations where I am so tired of lazy lawmaking. And so there's a huge risk here. I keep pointing out what the capabilities are for the just the president at this point, and is once the bill reaches the president, and this is the same for the CARES Act extension bill, but once the bill reaches the president that has passed both parts of Congress, the House of Representatives and Senate, then he has the ability to sign it, and then it goes into law. He could veto it, or he could just ignore it and then it expires and it has to be done all over from the beginning. This is clearly a war on vaping. Yes, I agree with David there, where it's like it's a war on vaping, and what they've done is they've lumped cannabis into it, not recognizing that right now, as a board member for Doctors for Cannabis Regulation, we still see vaping as one of the more safer ways of inhalation for cannabis patients. And vapes are still a very large and rapidly growing percentage of the market. And I'm not just talking about the marijuana market, I'm talking about the hemp market, where CBD vapes are only really second to CBD gummies at this point. And so we are impacting all of these various areas within the industry. And I would be very concerned if I was a smoke shop, but also if I was a CBD company and this was part of my assortment.
Absolutely. Definitely be concerned, because it passed both the Senate and the House, you guys. It did not just pass one. And at this point, it says that it's required that someone 21 or up actually picks up and shows their ID when shipping it. It's very interesting too, because all these things they're mainly made in China. And so they're going to put hefty tax and interesting frameworks together for you to start getting your shipments now.
I also see a rise in the domestic manufacturing of vape technology because of what has happened with coronavirus. There's like a hesitancy, especially something you got put in your mouth versus something you put on your head, like a wig, for example. I'm just being real. These are things that are big China import. And so just making sure we're aware that all of these things are, part of the challenge that we have with coronavirus, is that we become more domestic in our desire to still fulfill the needs here. So we may see the domestic manufacturers run into more challenges because of the impositions that are being placed than even the international ones.
Absolutely. And, I just feel like you guys, you got to keep a watch out. It's not officially into law, but that does mean that they are coming for you. And so let's get into our second hot topic, which really is about Weedmaps going public. Now, Weedmaps has been in the cannabis industry since 2008, you guys. So it has been here for a very long time. Now, its valuation is at 1.5 billion, sister.
Yes, I mean, I think that's definitely like, okay, I gave a side eye when I saw the valuation, mostly because I still feel there's a lot of inflation that happens in the industry, particularly around, the businesses that are run by white men. I have been talking about this for a few years as hemp-based companies have been going public. And so this doesn't necessarily surprise me, but I do question the valuation for sure. I think it's a bit inflated. What were their sales? I know you got them.
Well, according to the reports from 2015 through 2019, they brought in 439 million in revenue, and they're estimated for next year at 160 million in revenue.
Yeah, so part of me has to believe some of this has to do with what they've added to the valuation. It's like all about their equity, their brand equity, and capital investments, as well as their user base, which is what they really have as, I think, the most valuable thing that they have. They can reach millions, but we've had conversation about Weedmaps being a better, what I consider, corporate cannabis citizen. And I've seen some improvement in where they've been, but I'm always a little bit curious about things that are being done for show versus really making an impact. If they have such a large user base, then I think, and that valuation and that type of money coming in, they should definitely be doing a bit more as it pertains to equity, and mostly trying to figure out how you get people from the legacy market to the legal market. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
for one bit, they didn't care about whether you were a legal entity, right? So to me, I feel like they have access maybe to some of the unregulated entities, probably still. And my hope is that they will use that type of access and influence to, encourage people, maybe even help pay to create programs that get people to cross over.
That's a real cute idea. And I mean, like, I love that theory. However, you did shed some light to something I did want to talk about before. They basically have an open investigation with the Department of Justice, and it is because they had unlicensed dispensaries listed in the different parts of the legal states. Now, this is pretty big deal because we haven't heard much about the ongoing investigation, and it really was a probe. They're going in not really knowing what they're looking for, but they're looking for something. And in response, Weedmaps put a requirement that all dispensaries must list their license number in order to be listed.
Okay, so they're becoming a slightly better corporate citizen, but we got to worry now about them being a snitch. Listen, I hope they understand that snitches do get stitches, and at this point is not about criminalizing the legacy market. And we know that's what the DOJ wants to do. They don't know any other thing to do. And for me, it's about Weedmaps standing up as a true advocate, protecting those entities if they even have access to records, because they didn't require a lot to sign up. Right, that was the real issue. They didn't have a lot of bureaucracy or steps. It was just like you got a dispensary, just put your name up. So this presumption that they have all their back end data and is really just not accurate. So I do think that I want to put out there that they absolutely should be doing whatever they can to protect anybody's information. And as a matter of fact, being a vocal advocate to step up and say, hey, it's wrong that you're doing a probe without really having a case. It's wrong that you're still probing into things that the majority of this United States of America has said we want it to be legal. Why are we still criminalizing activities rather than trying to figure out how to get these activities over into the legal market?
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. That is so facts. First of all, you're right. We do not condone snitching, ratting out. I also think that they could have fought harder to protect their information and their users' information. Not for nothing, I'm not like a super social media fan of these big monopolies in that way, but they do kind of put up a little bit of a fight, especially in the beginning to becoming so big of their users' information when it came to the government, because they were private companies at the time.
Right. And the being they were private. When you go public, though, it becomes a different thing entirely in terms of what you have to offer up for information to be legit.
Absolutely. And so I'm curious on how they're going to store the data. What will they use with the data? And hopefully, it's figured out soon. Now, we do not have an estimated date on when they will go live, because this is all through acquisitions. And we also don't have a date. They said they would settle with the DOJ, but there has not been any official paperwork in the making.
Well, so basically, if you're interested in investing in Weedmaps pre-IPO, something to check out. But these are all risk factors. They got something going on with the government that, first of all, their competitors, people are like, well, who competes with Weedmaps? Leafly, for example, and they're not caught up in the same drama. Not to say that they're necessarily better, but recognize that all of them, like a Yelp, they contain millions and millions of user information. And so if you were somebody that maybe was accessing this application from 2008, because of the way data works, they know that, they have that. And what I don't really appreciate, because we know, the government's creating dossiers on cannabis advocates, it wouldn't put it past them to put together dossiers on cannabis users. At the end of the day, most of the incarcerations that have come because of cannabis has been for 90% possession, not cartel based or even distribution, just possession. So they've been arresting users for a long time on the federal level as well as at the state level. And so I would implore them to do whatever they can to protect the information of their user group. Because like I said, most of that valuation is caught up in the fact that they have millions and millions of user information.
Absolutely. And just, always thank you for breaking that down. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. The juice is hot. It is hot. It is hot. And I am so glad for everyone dropping their comments and their thoughts in the chat. And so let's move on to the third hot topic, because this is a short show. We want everyone to go back to enjoying quality time with their family. So we're going to run through it real quick. And our third hot topic is very juicy because Nature's Medicine is being sued for sexual harassment. Yes, you guys, you did read it right. And this is a multi-state operator. And as we know, we talk about it all the time, that there are different management companies under these multi-state operators that specifically work in whatever license they're holding. And it's now got caught up with them because Maryland's Health Management LLC, which was doing business as Nature's Medicine, has basically violated federal laws by subjecting employees to sexual harassment.
Allegedly. Well, listen, we know what the industry has been for the last 5 years. We've seen a lot of misogyny. We've seen a lot of sexual harassment claims, actually, from some of the really big groups, and not just companies that are for-profit, but nonprofit as well. You think you're getting into it and you're trying to, do the right thing with advocacy. And next thing you know, you see that someone is harassing you after sharing a joint. Some of that Wild Wild West isn't just about not signing contracts or not knowing what an NDA is, but also just being a little bit inappropriate, hypersexualizing women in the industry. And I'm really surprised that it's coming out of the East Coast. But at the same time, I'm not surprised because the industry has mostly turned a blind eye to some of this hypersexualization that's been going on forever.
Absolutely. And we talk about it. And it's the reason why we even wanted to create a show that would talk a lot about cannabis news and culture, especially coming from a woman's perspective, because a lot of times when it comes from a woman's perspective, it does have to kind of be muted or silenced by some of the male figures of leadership. And we're here to show that, that will not happen. Cannabis is actually being taken over and leading a lot of the charge, trailblazing it with women, especially women of color.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I know that the lawsuit doesn't really indicate male or female or what have you, any type of traditional gender. But I think in general, what I found is that it almost doesn't even matter because everybody's being subjected to that environment. So if you're a man who isn't necessarily interested in hypersexualizing women, I've seen this on a couple of projects I've worked on, it's like, you still somehow get forced into that scenario simply because that's what the other folks are doing. I'm good. I'm glad that, that there's a suit. It'd be interesting to see how this is going to play out.
Absolutely. Now, some of the allegations say that the patient service providers would have to be subject to, sexual comments or offensive comments. They were allegedly nude photos of the general manager showing around to the employees. And not to mention there were inappropriate touching. Now, why this is so crazy is because it was the general manager, and some of the things the manager allegedly said was that, hey, if you say anything or you make this super uncomfortable, I will make sure you will not get another job in the cannabis industry. Now, this is out of Maryland, which Not for nothing, Maryland don't got all that cannabis. It's not like California. It ain't like that big and that deep. So if someone is saying that they have that much power and control, so you cannot get a job anywhere else, of course you would believe them for, you know?
Yeah, I think this is why we've got to do more education within the industry, even because, you're right. Like part of me feels like my response would have been like, okay. But I think that's also after having the experience that we had in Arizona, where people thought because they were doing something in that market that they were going to be able to control what we did and who we interacted with and where our money was coming from. And all we did was like, but actually I'm from New York, and that market, even on its worst day, right, of a medical market, is still something a little bit more than this market. Furthermore, it's the largest legacy market in the country. So now what, boo? So it's sort of one of those things where we get really almost like, because cannabis can't cross state lines, we think we can, or we think that our intelligence can't, or our skill set can't, and that's just couldn't be further from the truth, especially more and more these days. But I know it's alleged or whatever, but it seems like to me there are multiple employees that have been named in this claim, and that is the right thing to do, is to prevent it from happening to other people.
Absolutely. And what's very interesting now, this did not disclose whether that general manager still works for them or if they're still suspended. But I will say that it now made Nature's Medicine create sexual harassment policy, because before then they didn't think that they needed it.
See, and that in of itself is a problem. Every effing company in this country that's not cannabis has a sexual harassment policy, because they know that if you don't and someone does do this, you could be sued like you're currently being sued. So it's like, it's not just the man being sued, it's the company being sued. And your lack of sexual harassment policy is indicative of how you value this, which means you don't. And I find this is to be part of my challenge with the industry, with the like bootleg nature of the industry. Is like especially when you have multi-state, right? You have an operation that's crossing multi-state. You're as close to being a national company as we're going to see in a cannabis industry, and you don't have a sexual harassment policy. Like, shame on you.
Right. Shame on you. That doesn't make sense. And you're right. Every other industry does. Why do they feel like cannabis shouldn't have one? I'm still confused about this. It's something so easy that your lawyer can put together. I mean, it's literally, templates of it. So this is what you get when you cross over. You got to bring a lot of the same policies crossed over.
I think there's this element of, and maybe some people would disagree, but people, even legit folks who've had so much experience, if you will, because sometimes it's more difficult in cannabis to get coverage or whatever, you feel like, oh, well, we don't need it. And the fact of the matter is, more so, it's not that you don't need it, is that you ain't putting in the energy, or you don't want to put in the energy, the effort to get it customized, and sometimes even being a pioneer. I'll give a perfect example. When we were featured on a billboard in New York City, Times Square, we had to change the law to do that. It wasn't just you make a purchase and it's done. It was a lot of effort to make it happen behind the scenes. And so I think what is interesting is that, you get a lot of people come into this industry who are well-meaning and maybe even have the experience. They have that corporate to crossover, cannabis crossover, similar to I do. But what they may be missing is the grit. And maybe that's the East New York in me. But just because you say no, or just because the law is not in our favor, doesn't mean that we can't find alternatives to do the right thing. And that's what I feel like has been missing from this industry.
Yeah, the real inspiration to do the right thing, I feel like. And with that being said, we will keep you guys up to date on any information that we receive and what the verdict gives, or if they even disclose more information, which I doubt, about some of the victims in the case. And, my heart goes out to you. Hopefully anybody else getting within this industry, especially if you work in HR, these are things that the cannabis industry actively needs. And with that,
I'm gonna look up their HR person for real though.
right.
Like, what were you thinking?
Right. And it's pretty sad because I feel for them, right? Like, it's a very small industry. A lot of people that work in the dispensary are young, so they don't even have enough experience with life to sometimes even know this is wrong.
Yeah, and I think that this is why I'll just give a quick shout out to the Cannabis Workers Coalition. The Cannabis Workers Coalition is really women led and young millennial women led, and I think really understands that there's a missing piece around cannabis employees having better global benefits, right? Standardized benefits and standardized protections. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to protect consumers. We spend a lot of time trying to protect kids. And I think that's important. Don't get me wrong. But if this industry is all about really building it the right way, we've got to protect everybody involved. And that includes the employees.
Facts. Well, shout out to them and keep doing amazing work. And so let's get into our main topic because it is a power play. It definitely will have me scratching my head as I give my 2021 predictions for the cannabis year because Canopy growth is making some power moves.
Yes, girl. This is definitely hot off the presses. I've been spending a bit trying to run through it, and I actually think we'll have to continue to revisit this because there's a bigger message in all this, and I want to make sure we get through the details of just what's actually happening. And I know you got those for us, but the message behind it means I do see ability to create some different programming around preparing for big corporate cannabis moves like this.
Yes, and we see it time and time again, but each time it gets a little bit more interesting, a little bit more risky, and it just shows the lack of cannabis competency some of the powers that be have. And so let's first talk about Canopy growth because we want to give you guys an idea of where they're starting all of this from. Ultimately, Canopy growth has been struggling for quite a couple years and quarters, trying to get some revenue, trying to create some revenue. You know, they have lost around $1.5 billion over the last couple of years. And if you don't know, they are based out of Canada. They are on the stock exchange. They have they are in American cannabis as well. But they are struggling. Now, if you don't know, Canada has a very restrictive market and they don't have as much products and licenses as some people in America tend to think. And even though Canopy growth is leading with the number of licenses, it's reported that at the beginning of the year, they had 3 times as many outdoor grow facilities as they did indoor facilities, which could have led to some of the issues they're facing now as they have officially closed all of their outdoor facilities and laid off over 200 employees.
Woo. So I don't know if I would call those power moves, but I do think when you get backed into a corner, you do have to recognize when you made a mistake. I feel like most of the big companies that came into the cannabis space over the last 5 years, they over invested. They're over leveraged. They've created too much debt, and it's not and expenses, and it's not you're not seeing the return on investment there. They definitely are doing the most with these outdoor grows, though, because I feel like that's something that maybe we could have predicted a little bit, perhaps. And I think that there's a little bit of a arrogance element where they feel they're too big to fail. But I don't know what we watched in 2008. Huge global financial companies fail in a big way. And to me, I feel like this is exactly what we've experienced most of our uncovered most of this year, which is there's a mediocrity around, white male leaders in the corporate space, and they yet keep coming back. They like cats. They got 9 lives, and every life is a different one. But yeah, so layoffs and closed facilities. How much you want to bet some of their hemp-based companies probably got some PPP loan though?
Oh, for sure. Sure. A lot of they probably got PP loan, Canada loan. They done got every loan from every part of any government they got their hand in. Or every country they have a facility, and I for sure believe that. And I do know that the reason why this is not necessarily a power move, but it is because as they've obviously grown in cannabis competency, they're realizing that, hey, Canada may only have 80 days of summer. It's a tundra. Maybe it shouldn't grow outside. Like, no, you can't grow Durban poison in your outdoor facility and think that it's going to be the type of Durban poison you need. It's like, hey, maybe we should have looked at cannabis strains that could be grown in cold climate.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is also about understanding the science and the fact that agriculture is important to this process too. And I don't know, the Canadian market is so funny. It's so weird because it also is interesting that CBD is illegal, and like there's like parts of the market that seem a little backwards, and I feel part of that has to do with big companies like Cannabis Grow, initially lobbying on behalf of certain things to put them in a position that they could even own this much shit. Excuse my language.
No, but real talk though.
It's true. And now that the industry basically is underperforming, it doesn't work as well as the legacy market. I wonder why. It's missing all the culture, all the flavor. And they're confused, but it's not really that confusing to me.
Absolutely not. It's not rocket science. I mean, you could have just watched a YouTube video and seen that maybe we should think about how we're going to really optimize this outdoor grow. Or maybe we should just get 3 times indoor grow and get maybe 2 facilities that are outdoor and, do a little experiment to see how well they do.
Or if it's the outdoor grow, you can actually just build a greenhouse. And we found that there's so many, hybridization of using the sun, but also still trying to optimize. At the end of the day, you're trying to make money. I get it. Outdoor grow is really important and is part of being more sustainable as an industry. But at the same time, if it don't work with your climate, and you got to test some of these things, but you also still need to be balanced in approach. And I think that could have been better for them.
Absolutely. Now, as they close facilities and lay off employees, it's reported that they have a bunch of unpackaged and packaged cannabis sitting in a warehouse, trying to figure out what it's going to do with its inventory. So I'm very curious how they're spending their Christmas holiday.
Trying to figure out how it's going to fall off the back of a truck. Cannabis has a shelf life too, like everything. Okay, so it isn't closed sitting in a thing, and we hoping it's just in style next season. It is actually a live product to some degree, and they even the ones that are manufactured, there's a shelf life. The longer that it sits, the less effective it can be, and the more there's a breakdown of the molecule. So in general, I feel like they definitely are trying to figure out how to get rid of all this. We like to talk about the legacy market like it's full of all these people who are so bad, but in fact, it's like the same people that's sitting right in front of you when you're lobbying about the big companies. They're also participating because they know that demand is still there, period.
Ooh. Tell the truth and shame the devil. You always keep it 100. I don't know. I can't wait to see your reaction when you go back and hear this, because that is some real talk. We already know. We've seen it tons and tons of time in California where big cannabis companies inventory goes missing, but we can look on a different Snapchat and find it real quick. So
I'll just say allegedly. I know they're not like the government. They ain't burning it. They're smart enough to not burn the old weed, right? So
Right.
that to me is like their best guesstimate based on the way California worked and the experience that we had working with large MSOs, is that there is always this temptation to go into what we feel like is the gray market. There's a shortage of cannabis in some markets, right? A
Right.
shortage of flower, in fact. And so, yeah, I believe the bigger companies have much better capability of being able to get around some of that and get it into a market that's buying, even if it's half the price or a little bit less than what they would have taken. They're overpriced anyway, real talk. So let's be real. They still make your money.
Well, we know you're going to be real. We don't know nothing else. And you're right. So, these are all allegedly, these are our theories. This is an opinion. This is just our thoughts. We have no factual hard evidence on this. And to keep covering our bases, why, closing down these facilities and, removing a lot of their expenses is part of a power move, is because in December, they were awarded a U.S. patent.
Yep.
And why is it so important that, this is a big trend we're starting to see with big companies patenting cannabis.
Yes. I mean, and first of all, patents are really almost like the government's way of giving someone dibs on something. Like, just to be real clear for anybody listening, like, why does it matter? It is an industry that, for all intents and purposes, as far as the government is concerned, did not exist. And so in some ways, and I say what I say, and you know what, I would challenge anyone to come for me on this, but this is the Christopher Columbusing of the industry, if you ask me, where basically we have a whole legacy market. We have a whole multiple generations of people doing certain things within, the industry, whether it is technique, whether it's cultivation and or cultivars. And it is basically who could get to the government quick enough, who has the money to spend to get to the government quick enough to get the government to say, hey, you've been doing this first, or you got to this first. And so while the patent to me is part of this trend, and it's something that I think legacy cannabis industry, that's why you got to get to the legal market, because you're missing that money. You're going to be doing things that 10 years from now, you might have to ask them, is it okay? Or you might have to pay them to do what you've been doing for 20, 30 years before they even came into the market.
Right. Well, you are always right. And I like that term. We need to coin that term, because for sure, this is some Christopher Columbus thing, because specifically the patent but it is over the extraction method of CBD and THC. And it's not a device. It's not a invention. It is something that people have used to extract for years and isolate those chemicals or those molecules, excuse me.
Yeah, so you know what? I guess I will say it again. This is exactly Christopher Columbusing, because the more I started to dig into the patent and you'll talk, I guess we'll talk next about this lawsuit, which is what I mean. It is basically them taking, ownership of a technique that we doing all the time in the cannabis space. To be truthful, taking ownership of things that are plant extraction techniques that they're doing in commercial non-cannabis businesses. For example, as the director of beauty for Victoria's Secret, we do CO2, supercritical CO2 extraction all the time. We use hydrocarbons, carbons like hexane and butane all the time to be able to get extraction out of plant material. It's one of the best ways to do it. We try to act like cannabis is some new age thing, but it's a lot of the same science that has already existed. And yet, because cannabis is affiliated with it, like I said, it's a race to see who got dibs. It's like calling for the front seat of the car as everybody's trying to get in. I'm riding shotgun, even though you just arrived and you just got invited to even go on the trip. You know what I'm saying? Like,
okay.
That's how I feel.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about it, because the gag is that, yes, they were awarded a patent specifically around a extraction method of extraction isolating method of THC and CBD. And in the same day they were awarded the patent, the next they literally sued GW Pharma for patent infringement.
Yes, so this is exactly what I was just saying. And also, let's talk about the chess maneuver the next day. So that means they already had that ready. They knew they had something pending. They got attorneys on board telling you what your next move. This is what I call chess playing 101, where you already know 3-4 moves before you've even made it, right? And so once they knew they got that approval, they knew that they would have the grounds then to make that type of infringement claim. And even though they're going after GW Pharma, to your point, when we were, first reviewing this, I was like, yo, they're about to, cause a major disruption. But the fact of the matter is, it's not about disruption. When you got money talking to other money, it's about money. It's not about stopping GW Pharma from actually being in the game. So they're not going to slow them down. All they're going to do is become a line item for GW Pharma. This is the chess moves that are happening in the cannabis space. And it's why I said we have to revisit this, because the more I read it, the more I analyze it, the more I got jewels for people of color, primarily small businesses, but also the advocates on the ground on what we have to protect against. We got to be aware of what's happening, though, and also see it in lay terminology, because when you read this 20, 30-page document around the patent, you're like, huh, what? And then you double check and reread it, and you're like, wait a minute, that's the way everybody doing it. But they're going after the person that can pay for it. And once you have someone on your books paying for it, you now set an even more precedent that you can go after anybody else that is doing that. And guess what they got to do? Now add it to their line item if they want to still be doing it.
Exactly. And so you are correct. Now, basically, they pre-acquired this patent because they had an acquisition in 2019 where they got a German company, and it was their actual manufacturing, and the original patent was actually issued in 2014. But let's be clear, it was initially filed in 2001.
So, okay, you are kicking so much information, and I just want to make sure everybody breaks down that 19 years, almost 20 years ago, this patent was initially filed by a company that was unrelated to canopy growth, not even within the United States. But this also shows you how the global industry has been further ahead than we have been for a while. Germany has many, many, many scientific papers on it. So they filed this, right? So in 2001, they filed this. Keep in mind, the federal government has had a patent on cannabidiol CBD since 1991. So even 10 years prior to that. So when we say Black people late to the game, we so late, it's like we're not even in the same game. Like we still in the prelims, and they're already trying to figure out who's trying to be in a championship game. Okay. Right. So yeah, I think, and it took 13 years before that patent was finally approved, which shows you also how the U.S. government is playing this game as well, because they basically was ignoring it until they felt like there was enough probably public support for cannabis being something that was patentable.
Absolutely, especially because it was an international patent that they filed for in 2001. However, when they filed it, it gave it a narrow lead, but very small, because ultimately it allowed companies like GW Pharma and others to use the same extraction practices without getting in trouble. Because they considered it maybe falling outside of the scope of the patent because it was such a broad patent. But now it's, rescinding some of that, and they're making it more specific.
Gotcha. So, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So it started off very narrow, and then they're making it broad again, so that
it started off very broad, and then it came very narrow.
Gotcha. Well, I am very curious about where this will lead us, because again, these things that they have patented are really normal everyday activities that are happening. But the joke of it is in 2001, those were normal activities that were happening in the cannabis space too. However, it was happening in an illegal underground kind of way. So again, nobody knew about it. But we know that there are people who are legally operating right now, legally master cultivators and the like, who are master extraction artists that have been in the game for 25, 30 years. And they're not going to get any credit for this. And they have stayed away from government involvement. They're probably the last people to even want to file a patent application because they think that's putting them on a list. And they may be right about that because they don't have the corporate protection. This is the capitalization of cannabis in its beginning stages. And everything that's happening here is exactly all putting the patients and consumers most at risk than anything else.
Well, you bring up a very good point because, it's Canopy Growth is alleging that they've been monitoring GW Pharma for 14 years. And that for 14 years, they have used the CO2 method of extraction that is ours and our patent. And now they are looking for the bag. They're saying, hey, we're not trying to restrict access to patients, to your point, but we are seeking, compensation for our damages.
Right. So then again, it comes back to the money. I don't know if we talked about it, but William Hughes Jr. basically said that if there is one, the patent ends in a year. And that's something I definitely want to dig into because there are termination points. But both times you're able to extend if you have the money. My biggest thing is this is a money game more than anything else. People don't file for trademark, for patent, for copyright a lot of times because they don't have the finances to do so. They don't have the capabilities, and oftentimes you have to do it in multiple jurisdictions. We were working, one of my first clients, I don't know if you remember, we were working on a patent pending application. We submitted those things for them and they're still pending at this point. And it was multiple thousands of dollars just to get the application done in multiple jurisdictions, both in the United States, and then you can pick specific countries, all have their own process, and then an overall global international one. It's a money game. It's not meant for the everyday person. That's really what it comes down to.
No, it doesn't. And if it's only specifically talking about I don't know, I'm struggling here because it is a power move. We've seen this time and time again with big cannabis companies trying to do these sort of power moves. But again, they were just awarded the patent again. So I don't think it's going to expire anytime soon. So it's just layers of patents on each other, really, too, which lets you know when they're acquiring all these companies, they're acquiring their history and their experience.
That's the whole point of an acquisition. I use this reference all the time because we know of this company, we work with them, and a lot of people of color know of them. But when Unilever acquired Shea Moisture, they acquired the entire C-suite, the entire senior leadership. And oftentimes, first they'll start up with a hybridization where they maybe will have a roll-up where the head of that group or C-suite needs to report into a high-level position, executive vice president position, on the things that they're doing, similar to like any other brand under their portfolio. But at the end of the day, it's still got to be evaluated on whether they're doing a good job. They didn't want to create, and they tried with Dove to create a natural hair line. It wasn't successful. And so the best thing after that is to acquire one and acquire all their
buying this as well. They're like, they are not buying this thing. But no, I think you make some really good points here because this is what big companies do. And ultimately, they have started patenting other things in cannabis, like Charlotte Webb patenting a hemp strain that we talked about it a couple seasons ago on She Blaze. So big cannabis have been making big moves in this realm for a minute.
You're right. No, and that to me is when we call homegrown big cannabis. So I have to just take a pause and say there's a big and a couple zeros difference between Charlotte's Web and Canopy Growth. Charlotte's Web was also born of the movement. Is based on Charlotte Fiji, who rest in power. She passed away this year, likely due to COVID, after living way longer than expected, thanks to her family deciding to really focus on cannabinoid treatment for her. They patented cultivars or strains that they grew, figured out what was going to work best in Colorado, but they grew that had really high CBD yield, CBD percentages, so that they could create her medicine. They've been under attack from the FDA for at least the last decade, and certainly more aggressively in the last 5 years, getting tons of cease and desist. And GW Pharma, in fact, their whole Epidiolex is really a rival against the CBD strains and CBD, I guess, tinctures they created under Charlotte's Web. It's a sad thing to watch initially, and so we root for them because they are more homegrown out of a patient need, out of advocacy, and they continue to still do so, but they also are getting bullied. They're an example of bigger companies getting to a point where now they become a threat, and so they're a threat to pharmaceutical companies that are in bed with government like FDA, and so it doesn't surprise me that the FDA is like, well, if they can pay for trials, then you can too. Luckily, they are doing those, but they're also making big moves like patenting their strains so that then they could say, oh, GW Pharma, guess what? You're going to have us as a line item too, because guess what? You're using our strain in order for you to make your Epidiolex. So I hope they're making that chess move, because you see Canopy Growth is trying to do that. Right. They see that they're going to still be in business.
No, absolutely. And, they should be looking to seek some damages, compensated damages, if you know what I mean. So I am here for that. But yeah, I think that you made some really great points. And at the end of the day, though, it is preparing cannabis 2021 too. This all happened in December. So it's right while people are taking holidays. It is while no one's really looking at the industry, even though a lot of election ballots go into law in the next month.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. I just also want to just give a nod to Michael McKenzie, who said it wasn't a CBD only regimen for a short period of time. Yeah, she was taking the whole plant. They moved to Colorado so that she could get full plant. And they've never, ever tried to separate themselves from the quote unquote marijuana side of things. And that's why I say they're more homegrown big cannabis versus Canopy Grow has never, in my opinion, been in business for the patients.
Oh no, it's all a money grab. Yes. But thank you guys for joining us. This is our last episode before the year.
Yes, 2020 has been quite a, crazy year, Ice, but we made it. We were able to go from surviving to thriving this year. And I'm just really proud of all of our efforts. And you were so right, sis, about having our episodes continue through the holiday, because all the juicy tea came in the last 3 weeks. They do be trying to slip it in on us, and then we'd have to come back in January like, oh my God, we need a 3-hour show to get y'all up to date. Okay.
Right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Chanel, for joining us. And yes, I'm glad we stuck around, because they are doing a lot of things right now while we're not paying attention, and while we're all still trying to thrive through this coronavirus pandemic. And so thank you so much for joining us. And on New Year's Eve, we're actually doing a She Blaze special event with Cannabisiac, where we will be giving you guys a countdown to the new year. So from 11 p.m. December 31st to January 1st at midnight, you can join She Blaze and Cannabisiac. We will put more information online on our Instagram and our Facebook. And any last thoughts of the year of cannabis, Dasheeda, before we go?
Listen, y'all better get ready for 2021. I think it's a great time, and I wish my camera was working because I would have on my shirt, but y'all gonna have to catch the shirt at the beginning of the year. But I will give y'all a sneak peek to my campaign for 2021, and that is I'm a Black woman and you can't tell me nothing. Okay, that is how I am going into 2021. So I want to empower everybody to claim their space in this, because we do need to get ready, and we need to stay ready and keep pushing. You can find me on @Dasheeda Dawson on Instagram and on Twitter. And of course, me and the company, the Dawson sisters at theweedhead.com. Can't tell me nothing. Nope.
I know that's right. And the sisters always knew we couldn't tell her anything for a long time. So you guys are just getting hip to it. And with that being said, make sure you listen to us and watch us anytime on Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, WeTube. We are everywhere. And we will be back next week as well to kick off the year with some great cannabis predictions like usual. And thank you guys for joining us. Bye.
Bye.
Have a wonderful holiday and happy Kwanzaa.
Yes. Bye, Ice. See you next week.
Bye.